Так, садитесь, пожалуйста.
Please take your seats, and we apologize for delaying this meeting. They have built a toll road here, which we're supposed to pay 2 toll points, and you must pay. As a result, there are long queues. There are longer queues to toll roads. I don't know how they built the road where there are only 4 booths. Certainly they made the wrong calculations, how many booths they need. Actually, I'd never expected, for that matter, that it will work out this way. Quite by chance, we were, my friend Inna, at next to the French, and a modest man is standing next to me, and we ran up, and they haven't seen each other for 27 years, over 20 years after Mirab died, and I ran up to welcome him, and although it's been 20 years, we recognized each other. It's clear that you can recognize him when I'm also in good shape. And we recognized each other, and we gave ourselves a hug. And we were so happy that we cancelled even some of our possible participants as experts to speak here, so that we could accommodate a session with Sergei Shumakov, who kindly agreed to take part. He's director and editor-in-chief of the TV channel Kultura. So it's a very honorable post. So, but in point of fact, we have here with us Yura Sinagosov here too. And I want to say is that we were pretty close with Mirab Mamardashvili, and he did not believe in the school and in alumni. He thought that schools and students can arise later on when he was gone. He never worked in order to commemorate something and to have some followers. But he believed that if you know something, then you know it enough and you will come. This, for that matter, also matters for what we do. We don't need everybody to take part in things we're discussing, but those who feel this urge, this is the only way it will work. So if we can say it this way, his favorite student was Sergei Shumakov. He listened to his lectures. Mirab sometimes was allowed to lecture on students some places, and then people would pay with their careers. I remember director of the Institute of Psychology at that time, the SSR, Davidov. He once, during all Soviet rule, he drank vodka, but he was at a very good true European level, a professional, and he thought that something needed to be done about development of humanism and arts and humanities. So today we have here with us indeed a favorite student by Mirab. Mirab rarely, if ever, was close with his students, but he always thought he was actually unequal to everybody. But as to students or professionals, he treated them seriously, and in this sense he was not kind or and merciless. Either you think of your own or you don't, and that's it. And to humans, yes, he was very kind, but as to style of thinking, he was very demanding. And I'm very happy that Sergei joined us today. For you and I, it's not just immersion in the past. It's just that we know that the past is here with us today. And Sergei, I'm so thankful to you that you traveled the toll road to get here. Thank you. I should immediately acknowledge that I didn't pay for this toll, so I have to be honest. Dear friends and colleagues, and I should apologize before you because I never really expected that there would be such bad traffic. And actually I did not expect to see here so many people and such a representative audience who could be interested in what I have to say. That's why I feel somewhat timid. And my objective is not really simple, because I'm not a professional lecturer, although I, despite all these kind words that Lena ascribed to me, I've never really done any public activity. My job is, what I do is private. I do it in the privacy of my office. And so here I am. I'll come up with something. The topic that I chose for this, it's probably pretty strange to hear about today, but it seems to me that for me it's a very interesting and a very relevant topic, because first of all, I do not understand a word about it. This is a question. This is a question which personally for me it's a very sensitive issue, and it is not a very sore subject, and it's not something, a question that is still open for me. It's the fruit of my many attempts to immerse oneself in theory into the matter, which I think where I felt very emotional, which as I think drives us all somewhat mad. I speak about the Soviet in our past. This was the topic of my presentation, and several just arguments before I start. So before I start, I want to work in such a way that in our conversation, which will be very open and frank, we can overcome this passion for assessing something and for being very tough about people. Because I will have to admit honestly, because for me this is a sore subject, but it's not a subject I understand. I've been contemplating it for quite a while. So the first thing we to do to avoid all kinds of political illusions and attempts in general to use the language which I will be honest dislike. Not because it's good or bad, but because there is nothing you can explain in it. I mean, the language of political phrase, but at least in the people who are around me. So I shall speak my own language, somewhat the language I invented, and I apologize if I sort of swerve away. I'll be then back to the central path and will try to find the right track. What I mean political illusions, because the word Soviet immediately implies evaluation. And so in these 20 years, in the previous 60 years, this was the word Soviet, and it's decay that really hidden behind it is a very long and bright and interesting life, both among language students, from philosophers to publicists, and starting with Frank and ending in Zinoviev. I deliberately avoid quotations. For me what matters is I seek to understand what does this notion of Soviet mean for us today. There are some, say, landmarks. You know that today is 75 years since the exhibition of economic achievements of the Soviet Union was set up, and it's done deliberately. So to avoid all kinds of evaluations, I want to say that it's a good story, because there's parks, and they create a surprising, make our reflections and ideas very visible and bring them to the fore. Secondly, it has to do with the fact that the words in the notion Soviet for me, it's somewhat like a Russian doll matryoshka, or as Mira Konstantinovich used like to say, it's like a case. There's something down below it. We can use this word for anything, and sometimes we may not even understand what we mean by it. To get down to this depth, it's incredibly difficult, and besides, for that matter, this is the matter which really is driving us mad. It does not allow us any transparent and give us a chance to evaluate the past and look into the future. There is some kind of plasma where we spin and are sort of boiling. It's getting mad because there are no guidelines here. Because for 20 years we've spent them with such a we spent 20 years with a false and somewhat primitive understanding how human thinking works, especially social thinking, how it works. So that it's enough to get rid of some ideology and to get rid of some political and formal cliches that in the long run your life would come back to normal all on its own, and we begin to speak another language. We begin to do acts which are different, and we begin to think in a different way. It turned out that it doesn't happen. This is what I found out. And for me personally, not as a person, an observer, but for a man who inevitably every day is taking part in it. You know what I mean, is that this is the image of the head that sort of is lost, that of a person who lost his mind. This is in Russian, we use the phrase which literally runs as your head left you, sort of. So for 20 years we've lived absent-mindedly with our mind gone, and the head was separated from the body with its reflexes and focuses. I'm just wanting to transmit to you my personal perception. It was particularly noticeable in culture when they wanted to put this head on somebody else's body, somehow to make it stick somewhere so that it should start to reproduce, say, Western values, amazing artistic texts, so that this question of freedom and liberty, it should immediately sort of, this head should become enlightened, this mind should become enlightened and should come up with some outstanding, eternal things. This never worked. This never happened. This never happened for a number of reasons. I do not want to go deep into it, but it's quite obvious that as I work for the Culture channel, TV channel, I can see this painful struggle of man with his mind that is gone, as something that doesn't have anything to lean against. This can be very visibly seen in our cinema, in our films, and in films this is something quite unexpected, because we used to live under this perception of the looming freedom and practically new European civilization where we felt we belonged, the European house, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden you get pictures, say, Balaban, of a film where all of a sudden you find out that this life is made along different lines. There are other reflexes, there are quite different ideas that do not. And man responds in a very different manner, not the way we expected. As we discovered this dark, unexpected with us, in us, this is what I began to realize some 20 years ago, when we realized that something went wrong, something is going wrong. Also sharing it with you my personal perception, because the second wording, the second sort of phrase in the topic of my presentation, post-Soviet space. It's something absolutely absurd, as I hear it, although it's commonly accepted and it exists as a political term even, because in post-Soviet space implies that it means there was some Soviet space and then some other space arose. And judging by it all, since we are still in development, this second space is somewhat in between the kingdom of darkness and kingdom of light. We're just like getting ready. We are in a state, in a condition where, say, somewhere ahead of us, something will open up. For me personally, I'm again sharing it with you. I have this feeling there is no such thing as post-Soviet space, at least within the Russian Federation. I don't feel it's post-Soviet space. I feel it's pure and simple Soviet space, absolutely Soviet space. There exists some other space that is known as, say, and named as, I don't know, but it's somewhere beyond the Dnieper or even further. But there is another space there, and it's quite obvious. I want to immediately ask, is it for the good or for the better? Again, I would like you to stop short here. Don't ask this question. It's too early to ask this question. Because for me, it's very important, this definition of the Soviet space as a definition of space that is different from other spaces. For that matter, with Mirab Konstantinovich, we discussed this topic quite extensively, quite often. At that time, for philosopher, that was unbearable. That was unbearable word. The word Soviet not as a political term, but as a certain body, this giant body that lies on 1/6 of the landmass, unable to reflection, unable for creating some shapes for the history that stays within it. And today, several years went by, I'm still thinking of it, but in the long run, for me, it is not an axiom, because this space, I repeat, as your case with the personal belongings, contains some other senses, some other conditions. So, if I simplify it all, behind the word Soviet, I see behind it some civilization-like, serious structures. And the interpreter also feels that Russia is a civilization in its own right. So that determines the life of people who live in this territory. It's absolutely certain that these terms that stuck to it are falling down, and because of a number of geopolitical and political events we are now facing one-to-one, the things that could be called as civilizational position. It is more than a political structure of society, because this is something that drives from reflection. And this is what happened to the mentality of millions of people in a month or two. It's not something like a coup d'etat. No, something that turns something abruptly. No. This is just, it means that the mind got back onto the body, to put it back. The head got back to the body. As I see it, as I see this process. And again, please don't give your evaluations yet, because like how good it is for some and how bad it is for others. No, again, it's very important to understand the nature of social and individual thinking in people who live in our country under these conditions. If you want to get some sort of rest and not get too tense here, it doesn't seem to have any promise here. You can easily break your back here. I would allow myself to look back 100 years so that you should understand what I'm speaking of in terms of some civilizational attitudes. So much for the cinema. So, first thing I wish to point out is that one of the first great full-range films was called Intolerance. Intolerance. Some of you may have seen it. That was a huge, grandiose saga. Intolerance. It's a story of a man who is sentenced to death and is awaiting the verdict of the district court, yes or no. And as the story unravels, we see all the stages of human history, from Babylon to the Huguenots. Just in parallel, it illustrates this one story of a man awaiting capital punishment. So I don't need to retell this film to you. This was pretty much popular later on, and in Russia the first full-length film was filmed 6 years before that. And do you know the name of it? It was called The Defense of Sevastopol. That was the name of it. And that was a fantastic saga, the level like Bondarchuk. It was so unexpected. And it lasted 1 hour and 20 minutes of inhuman sort of scale, where practically there is no place for, I want to draw attention here, there are no main characters in that film, and there are no individual motivations. That was just like a grand picture where Russians defend Sebastopol. Full stop.
Do you see the difference? Well, and another very interesting fact, quite a mysterious fact, and it will be my pleasure to tell you about that, because I don't think you are aware of that. So you will get it from the horse's mouth, so to say. The invention of cinematograph was quite a mysterious thing. And the very fact of invention of cinema and cinema equipment had some very serious anthological reasons. And such scientists as Deluc or Bazin called it a myth of cinema. So the cinematograph was invented because in the minds of the people there was the world of cinema. And that equipment was designed and invented that could record the real events on film. And it was a dual invention in terms of technical specifications. And just the cinematograph was invented, and the first performance took place in 1896, and 2 years later there was another first night of cinematograph in South Africa, and mercenaries hired by the British Empire first tested a machine gun on the battlefield. And it took them 15 minutes to kill 1,500 aborigines. And that paved the way to the new page of history. So that's why I refer to that as dual inventions, opening a new era. Because the mechanism, the very machinery for movie projector and machine gun are the same. And you know that in English the verb to shoot means both. To shoot a film and to shoot at the enemy. So the two machines, they changed the world radically. Because since that moment, most important global processes began. And when the machines began being used, and the civilization memory recording where those things are used, that makes it different, because the mechanism is just one. And in early 20th century, it was quite clear that a mechanism was single, but it was utilized in entirely different purposes. The shortest film that was shot in the United States was called "The Grand Robbery of a Train." And by some irony, the first Russian film that was shot at the same time was called "Stenka Razin." That's the story of the medieval gangster. And in the U.S. cinema, there was an object that became the symbol of the U.S. cinematography and U.S. civilization, and that object is a Colt revolver. And in U.S. Western movies, Colts were shooting as fast as machine guns. So if you're fond of that genre of cinema, I mean westerns, all humans using Colts do that at the same rate, at the same speed as the machine gun Maxim did it. And that's quite miraculous, and that is the everlasting theme, the theme of Colt. It's an everlasting theme in the U.S. cinematography. And the matter is that a person holding Colt and firing as fast as those British mercenaries, that particular gentleman remains to be a hero, who can address all the problems solely, that is, alone. And that's kind of the heritage of the culture of knights, medieval knights of England. So it is a sole hero doing all the things. So the subject of a weapon and a man plays a great role. And you should see what kind of weapon it is. Again, I'm switching to another civilization code that could be found behind or on the other side of the ocean and in the territory of the Red Russia. The great Russian movie called Chapayev, that was the name of a Russian or a Bolshevik troop commander, and I'm quite confident that was a great film that expressed the poetry and drama of the civil war in Russia, and fully convinced in that. I believe it is true. It's really a shocking film, and the main character there is not Chapayev as a person, but a machine gun, Maxim machine gun, which is capable of shooting very rapidly. You can see those are the entirely different, in terms of quality, civilization aspects that were generated by different cultures, and they have a great importance. And believe me, I'm talking about quite subtle and one may think odd things, but those are the things that determine or rather express our mindsets even deeper than we're used to think of it. Since, if you recall, the most dramatic episode of the film was when an illiterate, conventional Russian woman firing a single machine gun Maxim killed all the Russian guard, and during their psychological attack. So in one situation there is a hero who is designed to defend the law, and that particular hero is armed with a Colt. In the second case, the story is quite opposite. It's the machine gun that decides everything. And just a conventional Russian woman, and you can recall that episode, great episode, when the White Guard is marching on a psychological attack, psychological assault. They were marching without a single shot, just in silence. And Chapayev was also killed from a machine gun. You know, I'm talking about that because those codes are still alive. They remain to be in reality. And if you think of a Western movie, no machine gun can be used there, because otherwise it would violate the fundamentals of the culture. You can drop an atomic bomb, but machine gun does not fit into the picture. While in Russia, and I'm referring to another Russian movie, director was Nikita Mikhalkov, and again there was a machine gun that was the main character of the movie. So, and that just disclose our internal codes, which do work. And Mikhalkov just perhaps even unconsciously and not deliberately, but he's followed that code. And you know, I picked the two stories just to demonstrate that if we are too scrupulous studying the subtleties of the Soviet Union and the Russian history, you will see that there are some hidden mechanisms which are fully in operation and which we either do not see or do not want to see or study. And so it is often a case when we find ourselves in a situation of our former friends and colleagues. So when we visit Europe, that are referred to as a designer's project. And what is a designer's project? It's a shop window of high quality. And no specific countries are mentioned. But if you say arrive in Germany, it's Europe. And you see all those designers' projects everywhere. And I think that in Russia we have a lot of options, except one. We will never have a designer's project. It's not the land for designer's projects. Where does the history lead us? I don't know. But I think, I suggest you think it over. And there are various aspects to think over. This is the world we are living in, the world that is changing radically. I don't know where those changes lead us to, but the new world will not be that happy a world and like a world to us we lived before. And for you to understand that the process going on in the country are genuine, you should really think better, think more carefully, since we have a lot of designs or decorations that we can see. This VDNH, which is the was built in the Soviet Union during Stalin, and that is the great exhibition area to present achievements of the Soviet Union. So if you if you happen to be there, it's also kind of a decoration like the ones you see in Europe. So sorry for being rude, but the European Union is the inverted copy of the Soviet Union. Same bureaucracy. Look at their faces. Take a careful look. It's very indicative. No intellectuals, And again, I don't want to offend anybody, but I try to really understand what those mechanisms are. I described to you the way they look to me. Perhaps you have another image, but the world of old images is becoming more and more fragile, so you should really be careful about understanding that. Am I running out of time? 3 to 4 minutes more, please. And then comes the most terrible thing for me, Q&A. Okay, 3 minutes. The next, every word I'll say after the 3 minutes will work against me, like in the situation when you are stopped by the police. Again, I'm not a professional researcher, and things I'm telling you results from my multi-year observations and considerations of the world, and everything I'm telling you is my story. And I keep on surprising about myself. I'm so much Soviet, and my elements are so much conflicting, and still. Perhaps those who were born after 1991, you are more lucky. By the way, I teach in the cinema university, and I see those guys and girls, and they are so poorly educated, but they are very bright, they are really talented, and I would never dare inventing some characters, miraculous characters, and a student, sophomore student came to me and brought his work to me, some storming ocean, spills of water, miracles. Then the camera moves back, and I can see just a piece of glass and a drop of water that's been moved one way or another. So the image was just zoomed in, and I had every impression that it was a storming ocean. And I was shocked by the simplicity of that method. I thought I had never thought of inventing just shooting a footage like that, and so I really think that the current generation, most talented people, although not very much educated, and once I was not a creator, but I helped to shoot a movie. The title is Reading Between the Lines, and if you haven't seen the film, I would strongly recommend it, because that's the movie which you see and you know everything about today's life. So the script is based on a very interesting story about a Jewish girl who came from France, and she traveled to Palestine, to the United States, and then she came to the Soviet Russia. And she fell in love with the Soviet Russia. She went to very good Moscow school. She fell in love with Komsomol, and she was very eager to fall in love with a man, but she failed, and she was very sincere in her feelings. She describes her pre-war years, the happiest days and years of her youth. But anyway, she stayed, and she remained to be a Jewish girl from Paris. It's about codes again. You can really put yourself upside down, but you know. And that girl, when she was dying, she was alone. A very touchy, very nice girl, who really gave, with her script, he gave a great book to our children. I think that concludes my presentation. Thank you. So, I'm ready. I'm not certain if it will be just Q&A and those 20 of 30 minutes of traffic jam will be compensated. So my first comment, Sergei. I trust your way of thinking, but there is also something that I share with you. Perhaps this idea is not quite correct, but I think that irrespective on being Soviet, Russian, German or American, I'm not an expert on Oriental countries, but within the framework of the Christian culture, the way we understand evil and virtue, we have similar understanding of sins and all other things. And my life observations bring me to the fact that there is a very thin and fragile layer of culture, and there is also a very thin layer of culture on which civilization can come to terms and speak. Well, you kept on referring to someone else's experience while talking, and it's just like on some summit, on some mountain. But in every culture, we can see same kinds of gaps between the rest of things. But it's really a gap, if not an abyss. And those very thin layers can help us, or can help us to think, can help us to understand something in that life, and speaking same cultural language or cultural code, as you put it. Sometimes still they do not understand one another. And that's my personal experience. I share everything you said, but that's something I can add about that. I got your point, and thank you very much for that comment. Since it makes my life easier. And you can really give me a helping hand. I stepped aside, and all of a sudden I see that there is another dimension. And I will speak of that dimension in more specific terms. You know, the materialism that might today's pathos, emotions, is not based on the fact that we are different. It's based on the fact that we tried to be different. And however, we are as slim as other people in the world, and they were really the same, but at the same time, no Chinese ideologist, prime minister, or party leader I would never think of saying that him, his country, and his culture have nothing to do with Asia, while here in Russia that silliness can be afforded by the statements that Russia is not Europe. And you know, Lena, your point brings us to the key issue. My pathos, my emotions were related to the information that I'm receiving. And you know what information it is. There was the great Russian philosopher, Mr. Bakhtin, and he made excellent observations in his book on Dostoevsky. He wrote that culture exists only along boundaries. It doesn't have an inside zone. inside parts. The culture exists only in the framework of a dialogue along the boundaries, similar to thoughts and ideas that are also in existence on the boundaries. It's not inside. It's the same with love. It's only on the boundaries, not inside. If it is inside, it has a different name. And once again, I'm thankful to you, Lena, because it's true that everything that we wear, from socks to ties with men, and I am not speaking about women, it's something that belongs to the European culture, but that exists along the boundaries. It's not something that is brought here from outside, because it is on the boundary. Then you'll have to make an effort. You'll have to push your way to the boundary. And if it is brought inside the country, and if it is said that from tomorrow we will live in a different state, and you say, okay, but it was brought to us from outside, and we didn't make any effort to earn that. And that's the reason why today we have an army of people who have nothing to do with politics, but they just sustain themselves on some others' efforts. They do not do anything, but they appropriated the right to judge about literature, to judge about art without any effort. But as somebody put it quite correctly, they just rest on a sofa, and perhaps the upcoming events will shake them a little bit. But anyway, we have to wake up, and it's only through personal efforts that we can do something. And the level of culture we were talking about had always been in existence with Russia. It's like a thin film that bonded some areas. But it's the thin film, thin layer, and is not guaranteed by anything. There's a lot of people who, at their own risk, think and write. And I don't think that you will have to take a stand for that, the stand of somebody who was offended or blamed in some wrongdoings. Nothing of the kind. It's just happiness to have everything you like, and then they played a bad joke with us, and it created a great number of people who hate working and who think that can sustain themselves on someone else's efforts, and they're indifferent to many things. Can I have another minute or two just to entertain another idea on those boundaries and say how contemporary Russians look like? It's not about men, but women traveling abroad look great, and I like looking at them abroad. It's a great image. I tried to realize, to understand why Russian women abroad are just visible. Even if you go skiing, alpine skiing, and you see someone's back in the line, you are sure that this is a Russian woman. And then it occurred to me that quite objectively, Russian women are really the best. You are biased, perhaps, but I like them. Russian, Ukrainian ladies. We have Poles. Okay, let's expand the list. I have never been to Poland, that's why I cannot judge. And then there is entirely opposite observation. I refer to that as the feeling of insufficiency. It's the feeling that you have everything, but you still believe that something is missing, and so you are not sufficient. And your gestures, turn overhead, demonstrate that. I cannot explain it in material terms, but I invented that term. The insufficiency complex, just a little bit more and then I'll be happy, but that happiness does not come. And I'm talking about that. In some sense, that's an image, a shocking image of the civilization, another dimension of it. Since what happened in 1917, somebody put it as anthropological catastrophe. But looking at your faces, it was not the case. And I wish I could tell it to the gentleman. And I think he would agree with me. But he... And it's quite a surprising thing. That's something I referred to earlier as the civilization code. It has another name, and that's the special chosen people. For all people of the country, that's the feature, and try to understand when that feature appears. We know that the Israelis believe that they are the chosen people, and they live on the land. And but why can Russians be chosen? But I can feel it. I try to understand when it appears at school, in kindergarten, in university age. No. I realize it starts exactly from the second of birth, the moment a person is born. And I agree with Miram here. It's kind of mutation. It's a mutation of conscious, of mind, that the Bolsheviks managed to do, and they did it miraculously. And think it's some phenomenon with a great inertia. You might not remember that phrase, and in the Soviet times everybody knew that. It's rather that in order to become a communist, you have to really mount on shoulders of a human genius, and only on their shoulders, and having mastered the entire knowledge of the planet, you can become a true communist, meaning the person of the future. And that was really fantastic, and such an idea is related to the fact that in reality all literature was mobilized, all domestic literature was mobilized, all art, architecture. So in a perfect case, the Soviet person who is born inherits all those things immediately, just because the society that gives birth to that person says to him, okay, 2,000 years ago, people told, labored, sacrificed. Now you are born. Please make the best use of that heritage.
I remember reading in the elementary school the Philipok fairy tale by Lev Tolstoy, by Leo Tolstoy. You might not remember the book. And he walked into the school wearing just one boot, and the teacher told him, sit down, and I was crying. I was saying to myself, I said to myself, how happy I am. Have a generation of great writers. And he, Philipok, the little peasant son, did not have anything to profit by, had no future in front of him if it were not for the Soviet future. And indeed, this is what every one of you might have thought had you been born and raised in those years. And so without 10 years ago, when I came from London, I could have talked to people who thought that this is the only way how life can be, and then on the sixth day I went to the pub and started drinking the scotch and said that this is the only salvation, because otherwise one would simply get depressed by this overarching power convention, because everything is just the only possible riverbed. This is the kind of life that you're given. We have a different view. We think that, but they think that there's something new. But this is also a very Soviet mentality. This is also something that our mind works by as a mechanism. Your comments and remarks. Andrei Kolesnikov. This presentation is very important because it really opens up the second or the third layer and of the events of today, and may even be a premonition of the future, or even an attempt to dig deeper. I once had a conversation with Vadim Zaglatin, one of Brezhnev's closer aides, who was the last person to read Brezhnev's texts before the Secretary General read them. He said that the Soviet Union is a new civilization. Can I write about this? Leonid Ilyich Brezhnev liked the brochure very much. And this was the first experience on the reflection. Even though this civilizational moment might have been present there, it was still an empire. An empire not quite unlike the British Empire or the Roman Empire. With that said, I maintain that we live in an empire which is still extant. It is we're seeing this process of the disintegration of an empire, which is the empires take many decades to disassemble. And the greatness of this session is exactly that you have to decode and analyze this. And so this is either a propaganda cliche or the use of the Soviet concepts by deriving its legitimacy in the Soviet history. And the only project is the Soviet civilization, and this government resorts and the legitimation of this regime is mainly associated with the history of World War II, or the Great Patriotic War as it is known in the Soviet mythology. About 3 years ago, there was a project which was never started, planned but not started. Dmitry Bykov and Denis Dragunsky had to start publishing the Soviet Union magazine at the expense of one of the reflexive oligarchs. Bykov and Dragunsky said that I want to understand how did it work. And there were indeed these civilizational codes that we speak about. However, such a civilization did not produce anything special. It was mainly imitational, and Stalin's cinema, even pre-war, Stalin's cinema is quite imitational. And the attempts of Shumyatsky and others to build a Soviet Hollywood was also imitational. The bomb was imitational. The Zhiguli was an imitation car. Technology was imported. And the same happened with the Soviet computers, which indeed tells us about some vacuum or indeed hollowness of this civilization. And this imperial vacuity was inherent in it. The last thing I would like to say, I was much better acquainted with the previous ideological team, but Mr. Surkov's team always tried to not to be compared with the Soviet Politburo, and they tried to make an impression that the so-called project of sovereign democracy has nothing to do with the Soviet power. However, the ideology was widely set by not by them, but by one person whose eyes, whose optics are targeted to these management codes of the Soviet times. And in this sense, the Soviet history became a very important instrument of the state management or the state governance. Nina. Thank you very much, Elena Mikhailovna. Nina Kolipova, Republic of Komi. I'm very glad to have heard about these dialogues of culture, but I would like to make a quotation that the Western values were introduced to us. And what do you mean, and how is it related to, say, the study of music, which starts in the West and ends in Russia? And also, I would like to know your opinion about such a project as the basis of cultural policies, which is a very debatable document. What is your opinion, and do you believe that it will ever be accepted? All right, I will try to be brief. What values? Do not look, in my words, do not try to catch me, because I'm not running away. It is all quite simple. A country in which we lived before 1991 was good, except for that it did not know what is money. Money as a concept existed, but money as a real instrument were not there, and they only arrived into this country as part of the Western economic culture. I'm not saying that what is good or what is bad, as some sort of a structural machine which allows certain processes to be launched. And it is not in any way surprising that the people who were dealing with these processes were called academics. I'm not going to talk to you about some of the linguistic successes of today's government and the previous government, when some of the terms which are introduced have no meaning but are literally empty. And this is what we call And the last comment, we have 2 Kremlins and 2 programs. The program that you're discussing was created by the Ministry of Culture, and it was and the real program prepared by Mr. Tolstoy, the balanced, very accurate, very well future-oriented and uncontradictory. This program, supervised by Tolstoy, has not yet been introduced, and I think that this program will eventually be accepted. Several comments. My first comment is related to your retrospective of films. When you spoke about Sevastopol, an idea sprang that the 2 cultures, one based on individualism and the other related to collectivism. Yes, indeed, this is 1909. Oh, that is not a Soviet film. So I think that a lot in the Soviet epoch comes from the pre-Soviet times. And the one other thing that I would like to mention is the name of your presentation, the phenomenon of the Soviet man, or Homo Sovieticus. And I think that there's a lot to be said about nostalgia for the Soviet times. And these were the young years, and to many this is related to the young times, to their young age. I do not have a nostalgia. I do not like those times. I do not like the people who were running the state. I think that we live in a different state today. Even though my colleague spoke about the Soviet cliches, I think that the state is governed by the people who project their desires. Mr. Putin was once asked a question: are we going to live under this manual regime of government? How else can we live, he said, because he has no other way to govern. Anton is just Anton Petrov from St. Petersburg. I'm glad that we speak about the culture. It happens that the literature makes people quite immune to violence. This is what Iosif Brodsky spoke about in his Nobel lecture. He said that if somebody has read Dostoevsky, Stendhal, or others, that person is not inclined, would not be inclined to violence. But if you read and look at the reality of today, then today's Russian writers, when, say, the writers are quite aggressive together with the society, and they're even heading this aggression. What can we say about these writers? Are they persons of literature, or the literature has changed, or Iosif Brodsky was wrong? That's easy to answer. Iosif Brodsky was a great poet, but he was quite a Soviet man. I remember his last interview. It is quite a Soviet expression. You might remember Russian writer Uspensky's work about the 19th century. The 19th century Raznochinets, or a person from the common folk, who for the first time in his life saw the Venus of Milo, and so he stood upright. And the words of Brodsky, that the writer and the society, these are all breeding or the results of this Soviet code. With respect to the contemporary writers, I think that there are no writers today worthy of mention. This is my answer. What you call books, I can talk more about this, but I do not see prominent names in today's literature. Yuri Lagunov from Bryansk. The name of Jane Psaki. I would go to the United States just to meet that lady, because the propaganda machine of a great state pretending to be the world leader is manifested by this lady who stands very upright. And if ever I have the honor to express my admiration, I will do that. As a man and as a military a person, I'm very thankful for the connotations you have supplied with respect to the arms. And there will be new connotations. The machine gun. The machine gun is a defense weapon. With the machine gun, you cannot run for the attack. You can only shoot the assaulters. And the Colt in the American cinema, I more often see Thompson machine guns and Rambo's ammunition. I think that the defense of Sevastopol and these machine guns have to deal with the Russian experience. I think we have gone from deliberation into the expertise. I'm not a great expert in weapons or arms. And as to Mrs. Psaki, this is a very individual thing. Please do not exaggerate the abilities of the Russian propaganda. It is not acting upon the great powers. It is not influential. It just doesn't get there. It is not let in. With respect to Ms. Psaki, she's a fine person. But I live in a country where non-professionalism has become, or is becoming, a routine matter. And blatant non-professionalism to that. I never expected this to happen in the United States. However, it appears that the State Department and the U.S. intelligence do not seem to have any professional skills whatsoever. And we just look at it in a somewhat different way. Ivan Vlasov from Kaliningrad. Deriving from your presentation, the Soviet people were great stoicists, the people who were born in after 1991, skeptics, the Epicureans, hedonists, who are they, and how would they communicate with this great Stoic tradition? Try to avoid assessments. I'm almost an old man now, and I read Gladkov's writings in 1939 to 1940. The arrest of Meyerhold, how the school graduates spend their graduation ceremonies, 1939 to 1940. They are not in any way different from today's people. Same desires, same aspirations. They may have less capacity or potential. But other than that, it's exactly the same psychology. So when Gladkov fell in love with a younger lady, he said with chagrin, "No, in 1925 we were different." And he meant that in 1925 they were more ideological. 1939 is a different era. You have but all of this is, of course, very, very passing. Proust helps. Marcel Proust can help you in that, because virtually all models exist there. Alexei Yermakov from Golitsyno. Sometimes I watch the Culture TV channel. But the interesting thing is that it seems to me as if I watched a remarkable broadcast. We're not going to criticize you for it. We understand what is your official position, and we understand what is your state-backed office. We forgive you for it. But the one thing I wanted to say is that when you say that head was tilted, it was tilted because these thoughts came into this head. We may say, what thoughts are you talking about? Well, you've said that the head was tilted and it was filled with thoughts. But then, do you not feel yourself responsible for this head to be back? Do you not feel responsible? I have not mentioned or noticed any sense of guilt. What do you try to criticize me for? Well, that's a great assessment. I do not feel any responsibility. I do not feel guilty myself because to begin with, I did what I liked, and I liked what I did. And I emphasize this because so many people have lived this life in a comfortable way. The second circumstance is that I was born here in this country. My forefathers lived in this country, and I love my country, and I know many great people, exactly, who hated this country exactly because they loved it.
I'm the only person at the Russian TV. I'm just telling who on the 19th, when the putsch started and our country was upturned, I actually wrote down a statement to resign, and it was taken. And I worked at the Central TV at that time. As to the Kultura channel, culture channel, I'm not ashamed of it. I wanted to implement one simple idea, and I managed. This channel is taken as its own by Russian intellectuals, by the left side and by the right side. Those who want to develop country into one side and to turn it into the other side. It's their own. The culture channel is their own. Everything happens at the border, where people start talking to each other and argue with each other. If they are incapable of doing this, if they dogmatically follow certain rules, I am usually not involved with discussions, but I thank you for your high evaluation of my activities. I have nothing more to add. Dmitry Gorin, school graduate. I have a comment, not a question. I'll be brief. I'll name 3 reasons why it seems to me that this talk is important. First, phenomenon of the Soviet Union is a complicated phenomenon. You should not simplify it. You should not look at it from top, so to speak. And your intention allows to be constructive about it. Second reason, phenomenon of the Soviet Union is a stable phenomenon, unfortunately. Well, which is assessment, but this is a stable phenomenon. In an interview of Marat Mamardashvili after the Congress of the Soviet Union, when the country was disintegrating, and he said that the Soviet system wouldn't break because it's strong. It may be because it's in the heads, and it may be transformed only when something changes in the heads. And the third thing why it is important, the Soviet phenomenon is not just political. Now, 3 things I would disagree with, which should be noted. I doubt if we can see at the Soviet project, leaving aside the policy, it was a political project from the very beginning. And if we leave the political assessment aside, I don't think that this kind of optics would work at all. The Soviet project as a civilization, it seems to me that this is a very complicated subject, and the Soviet culture is not civilization. Of course, it's pretty individual, but civilization structure is something else. In the Soviet project, the key role was played by the state, and that's why it was an empire and not civilization. And the next disagreeable thing, we are quite an individual country, no more individual than Brazil or India for that matter. But this individuality should be considered as something alive, something what will develop in the future. Berdiaev was saying that Russia will manifest itself in future not as the laggard country, the country which was lagging behind. I may be sympathizing with the Soviet past, but it's the past. When I think about the Soviet as a modern period, I feel afraid. I'll repeat myself. If I was not clear, I apologize. I said that I didn't like my Soviet past. I don't like it. I don't want to go back there. I don't feel nostalgic on films, songs, dances, and so on. I'm talking about something else. That's a designer's project. You go to VDNH, and you go to me and say that this is awful. And I'll tell you that this is wonderful, because this is a wonderful trace which was left. It may be expanded up to for the whole of the country. I don't think that our government would Sovietize our country. No. Have a look. All mechanisms are different. Probably they are more complicated, but they are different. They are not Soviet. Otherwise, we wouldn't have sat here. Thank you, Vadim Korovin from Tambov. I responded to your comparison of the European Union to the Soviet Union. You said that European Union is a turned-out copy of the Soviet Union. You said that they have no intellectuals, but just Psaki. Psaki is not in Europe, by the way. You may say that Porsche Carrera is a copy of Zaporozhets, which is turned out, because it also has 4 wheels and round lights. As to the European Union, it seems to me that European Union is a successor of the Russian Empire, because there was a supremacy of law. And the Soviet Union, it was an experiment of ultra-leftists at the beginning of the 20th century. And the country was named Russia, and that was the experiment. Thank you very much. Denis Grekov from Altai. I would be vague as well. I've had a meeting before the seminar in Moscow. At New Arbat, I met someone, not far from the White House, by the way. He was drunk. But one could see that his way of life is satisfactory. He was probably about 50. I wanted to pass by, but he addressed me. He said, "It's time to die." And I understood that he remembered himself at this moment. And so probably he was not happy at this moment. So I would want to ask you, what was I supposed to answer him? Yes, well, it's like a TV program, time is coming. I don't know, you have met a man like that. I have met another man a week ago in a small English town, which is called Portsmouth. There was an unhappy man who was drunk, and he criticized his fate, asked for a coin. I gave him a coin, and I couldn't tell him anything, because he also wanted to die. What can I respond? I don't know. I understand that Arbat is a sacred place and there are special people there, but they exist in other places and you have to hold a dialogue with them. I understand you are talking about pain. This is the pain, like in case of a famous literary protagonist at the end of the 19th century, like Humiliated and Insulted, a book by Dostoevsky. But Arbat is next to Kremlin, and it's very easy to make all sorts of combinations and feel special. Don't go along this road. You wouldn't find anything on this road. This is my comment. Timur Uzhakov. I belong to the age group which remembers the Soviet Union pretty well. And I was still lived in the Soviet time. I went to the university in Moscow. My question, you mentioned civilization codes which are deep inside humans and they reach some mystic level without any rational thinking, but they hold us and stick us to the past. I remember Perestroika time when people dreamt about reaching the Western society and we would be happy and everything would change around us, but this didn't happen. Something was holding us strongly out of our past. My question to you, how deep are these roots, how strong they are? Can they change within the lifespan of human beings, or they change only with the change of generations? It's a good question. Thank you. I'll be brief. In Russia we have everything but time. And the processes that take place and that may develop quietly and gave hope that 2-3 generations would bridge the gap, intellectual, mental gap between, let's say, East and the West. I mean, East is Russia. It might be closed. The gap might be bridged, but not liquidated completely. The generation I've been talking about was the first generation which grew up in ideologized environment. So the intellectual darkness, I mean, they don't know who Lenin is. It's de-ideologized environment. They don't know Brodsky or Shukshin. They simply don't know these names. They are de-ideologized because we know Shukshin, Brodsky, it was ideologized. It was very important for us. So the process of de-ideologization is total now in its nature. What we call Soviet projects, these are designer projects, attempts to hold oneself mentally on a certain ground. Then there is another important issue for me. You say that shall we be able to reach the Europe? Do you consider this as a road? How quickly do we have to get there? Is it important for us? And on what conditions we want to get there? I'm talking about culture now, but what happens at the post-Soviet space is a very sad story. There are certain good painters, but there is a certain cultural context which existed in the Soviet Union. It's not there at all now. So you have to understand that when we come to Europe, we reach certain standards, and that's good, because the right of law is decisive. But are we ready for this? I'm not sure. I would pass a certain school of preparation at the territory where we live now, developing ties which we do have with Europe now, because we don't have anything from China, from Mongolia. What we have is only from Europe, and we have no time. Yes, that's the way it goes in Russia. We have no time.
Юлия Счастливцева, выпускник школы 2012 года. У меня совершенно небольшой комментарий, вопрос и недоумение одновременно. Может быть, вы поможете его развеять. Я недавно была...
I was recently in a small town of Urals, which may be called the Soviet town, and I found out that there was a phenomenon of Psaki. All the town discusses this every evening and everybody laughs. As this symbol of the State Department of the United States of America. And it reminds me of a sense of so we don't know what we fight with. Everybody criticizes the State Department through this move. We don't fight anybody. How can we fight her? She represents the largest superpower of the world. So everybody wants her to stay there, to stand there, because he can say foolish things. That's what she's there for. She's allowed. Because a normal person would be ashamed. A professional diplomat or speechwriter, he would be ashamed. But she's fine, and she pronounces these foolish things, and everybody laughs. But I don't think that I have to criticize Ural citizens who laugh at this. Okay. I dealt with this issue, and it seemed to me very strange that a woman who speaks on behalf of the big country, and she says foolish things. And that's why I checked all foolishness of her, and I have to tell you that she did not say any foolishness. All the foolishness were fakes created in Russia. Thank you very much. And what do journalists do who ask you questions? You heard these journalists? Nikita Molchakov, Moscow. I wanted to leave the dangerous topic of Psaki, which is the issue of opinions. We may have different opinions, but your presentation made me remember a phrase of Solzhenitsyn that Russia has lost our 20th century. Why? Because Russia lost human beings, creative human beings, those who look in the future, who are products of the great individualist revolution of modern that took place in the Western world. So we lost this kind of person. You mentioned why it was this person was lost. A weapon of mass destruction, machine gun. Of course, you remember the problem of death. In BSc, there was a long way to death, and the problem of death after the world wars, it's different. We have to then remember Tolstoy. Human beings are being killed, and they have no time to think about the death. It's true about hundreds of those who was killed in Nazi concentration camps or in the Soviet camps. And this is our anthropological term, which means that we have to return human beings. Let us remember attempts to return humans who cost life to their authors, Boris Pasternak, Dr. Zhivago, and Vasily Grossman, Life and Destiny. These writers died Pasternak died 2 years after publication of his book, and Grossman died 4 years after his book was not published. So the problem these two great Russian writers wrote about in the Soviet Union raises the issue of how to become men, how to return to frames of the 20th century. Just one comment. Stanislav Stansky, school graduate of 2012. I agree that our task is to return human beings to modern times. But the concepts of the state and cultural project comes not from the interests of humans, but we are getting back to the interests of the state and the country, and it does not take into consideration the constitution and constitutional stipulations about human rights being the chief value. And in this regard, I cannot agree with you, Sergei, because you said that this project edited by Tolstoy is immaculate. But this was a very important topic. Give me 30 seconds. By the end of the evening, I feel truly responsible for everything that happened in this country for the last 90 years, because now I'm responsible for Pasternak and for Solzhenitsyn, and this is a great honor for me. When we met, when we started our discussion, I told you that I would tell you about my own doubts, about something which I don't understand, and I decided to talk to you about, because my lack of understanding may be your lack of understanding too. I wanted to question your assurance in certain issues about loss of man, for instance. Solzhenitsyn was right. We lost a man in the 20th century. We lost him in the beginning of this century. At least we haven't found him. So this is pretty declarative, to find a man, to place him into the center. These are declarations. You need certain practical actions. So you may look for a man only in culture. There is no other place where you can find a man. And where you look for him, he is not there. There are technologies. Right, and important technologies, political, social, but no humans. Other issues are on the agenda there. Human beings are born at the frontier with their own efforts, only where there is a cultural environment. So the task of our country, and my personal task, is to hold this cultural environment. I mentioned writers, but the problem is not that there are bad writers, but there are no readers. Because writers are needed only in the places where there are readers, which may be influenced. Nabokov once said in America, he said the best created by the 19th century literature is its readers, because only because of readers everything else exists. So if you want to find a man in our country, you try to create a cultural environment saturated and dense. And in our country, philological departments are destroyed, where people learn to read. I leave aside philosophy, and thank you very much. I sincerely want to thank Serежа because this was very frank and sincere. He said a very important thing, which you heard now. He used the word effort. He's been analyzing the culture and to be a man, and it comes from his philosophical feelings. A man is born from efforts, and these efforts are to be constant. Mirab, whom we addressed today many times, he once said, and he referred to Pascal, agony of Christ is eternal, and in this time we should not sleep. And at each point we make this effort. So the school seminar is an effort because we've been talking here mostly about culture, of language, culture, of art, but we've been talking we should understand that the culture in which we live and we create every day requires a certain institution which is called the law of the right. We require an institute which formalizes artistic and emotional relationships, which tries to bring in harmony. And during these seminars, we talk about this. I don't know about the final result, but these seminars and all participants of these seminars, and I've been involved with these seminars for 20 years, so we will understand that you have to do it. The question is, can you impose it? Probably not. And I recall the words by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who wrote in the Public Agreement. I don't quote it, but I give you the approximate idea that Peter the First was named imitator, because Peter the Great formally destroyed traditional Russia and pushed it somewhere. He imitated the modernity and left it at the same time. But after they imitated possibility of being Europeans, something happened, and we saw Pushkin, for instance, in its highest manifestation. We saw all the Russian literature, but still we didn't reach the law. So modern people, including myself, although I'm too old, but people should understand that this attempt should be made. All these things are made by the enlightened minority, and then majority parasitize on it. I was a general producer of serial, which was called Life and Destiny. I thank you all.
Так, извините, я не Андрей Александрович, все забыла, все потеряла. Все потеряла, все забыла, сколько перерыв?
Друзья, в 21:30 мы здесь собираемся, ужин уже на столе, так что чуть-чуть сократим на полчасика. Я думаю, что мы уложимся, чтобы нам не в самую ночь